Topics J, if you have asked a question or comments, you could be in Portuguese. And Dora, me, or Barbara translates to him. And anytime, any moment you have a question or a comment, give it your hand via sign, and we can translate the Portuguese to English. Okay? Feel free. Okay? Relax and go.
Also, feel free to try your English. And because yesterday, Raphael came up after class and asked me a question, and we had a conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he apologized for his English when his English was almost perfect. So it was very good, and I'm very accustomed to talking with people who don't speak English as their native language, and I don't evaluate you in terms of your ability to speak English. I only am interested in your question and helping you think about something in a different way. So today, I want to remind you again, if you weren't here yesterday, if you want to get access to the resources for each of the chapters, you can go to the Dropbox, sign in, and put in my email address, and the password for the Dropbox is right there. And each document label, I misspelled label, so I'm sorry for my English. Begins with the chapter number, okay? And those are simply optional for you. You know, if you're interested, you can look at them. If you want to download them and save them for other times and use them when you're doing research or a paper, that's fine. So sometimes I'll refer to certain ones. So today we'll talk about chapters 3 and 5, which are kind of related chapters. So one of them is on socialization, and the other one is on deviance in sport. And probably the chapter on socialization is one of the most important in the book because it deals with many questions that people ask in their everyday lives about how we get people involved in sport, how we keep them involved over time, what happens to them when they participate, and then when do people stop? And do they start up again later? And why? Why do they quit participation? So those are the main issues in that chapter. There's one other issue in that chapter, and that is an issue that I call community socialization. Because when we watch sports in the media, or when we read about sports in the media, all of the messages and the images that are presented to us are representations of the actual event. So and those representations are created by people who want to entertain us, but they also have particular kinds of orientations that are coded into the representations. Messages related to ideology, to values, to attitudes, perspectives about the world. So if you were in the United States and you watched the Olympics in the United States, and you also could watch the Olympic broadcasts in Brazil in 2016, you would hear two different representations. And one of the representation in the United States would reaffirm the values and the orientations of people in the United States, especially the dominant ideologies, the dominant values. And in Brazil, you would hear something different, but the representations in Brazil would reaffirm the dominant ideologies, the dominant values in Brazil. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but I want, before we start on socialization, yesterday a couple of people told me that I went through the material on chapter 2, the theory and research, very quickly, and I didn't talk about some of the things, and I just wanted to talk about 2 or 3 things related to theory. In the book, in Sports and Society, as you read the different chapters, I tried to explain theory so that students could understand it more easily. You know, there's so many different kinds of theories that we use in the social sciences and in sociology in particular. And so I tried to come up with some kind of a categorization of theories that would help students understand the different viewpoints that each type of theory gives. And so I divided theories into cultural theories, interactionist theories, and structural theories. And if you read that chapter, you know that the cultural theories explain what we know about how people think, the perspectives they use to make interpretations of the world, how they express their values and ideas and beliefs as they live together and create social worlds. So, various cultural theories are used to focus on that part of reality, all right? The cultural part of reality. And then interactionist theories explain what we know about the origins and the dynamics and the consequences of social interaction in particular situations. So if someone was studying us right now, they might use interactionist theory, and they would look at the interaction that's occurring. Even when you're not talking, there's interaction occurring. They might look at your body language, they might look at where your eyes are looking, and they would see what kind of connection exists between you and me. What are the dynamics here? And they would try to explain those dynamics. And the language difference would be a major factor, obviously, in influencing the interaction here. And interactionist theories help us understand those dynamics and the consequences of our interaction. And structural theories explain what we know about the forms of social organization that shape our lives, that influence our actions and our relationships. So that's where social class comes in. Social class would influence the way people interact, the kinds of actions that they engage in. So the roles that we take. So now I would be in a particular role as a guest presenter here. You're in the role of student. So you're playing the role of student right now. And Donnelly is playing the role of observer faculty member, so that when he meets with you, or when Dora meets with you, or Barbara in other classes, they can maybe refer to some of the things that I say in here. But our roles are very important. You know the role of student. So, and that's why you're sitting just the way you're sitting. And that's why you're looking in a particular direction as student, because you've learned over all these years of being a student that you be a student a certain way. And And in some cases, that's a problem because there's many different ways that you could be a student, but you've learned one way, and maybe there's some other ways that you've learned that are more appropriate in other settings, all right? So anyway, the structural theories look at how the world is organized. Status hierarchies, roles, expectations. So, I'm not going to go through this, but this is in the book, and you can take a look at the focus that cultural interactionists and structural theories have in terms of what they explain, the major focus of analysis, the concepts that they use, and also examples of research related to sport. Right? So, I think an important point when you read the book is I take a critical orientation when I think about sports and society. And I always ask questions about why. You know, why are things the way they are? And could they be different? And if they were different, what kinds of different consequences might there be? And when we look at sport the way it is, who benefits from the way sport is organized? And who does not benefit? So, for example, we know that, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, we know that sports have emerged out of the values and the experiences of men. And generally, it's been men who are interested in conquest, in overcoming obstacles or other countries or other people in their own country. And so sport has been created by men who view the world in a particular way. So when women have wanted to get into sport, many of them have felt uncomfortable because they're entering a world that's been created by and for men. And that's why teenage girls drop out of sports at a much higher rate than boys, because they don't feel as comfortable in sport cultures and sport structures as boys do. So one of the big issues, if we want more women to become involved, we have to start thinking about changing sports in ways that reflect the values and the everyday experiences and the orientations of women. So it's unfair to say, if you want to play sports, you do it the way I do it. All right? So what we have to think is, if we want women to play more sports, we have to organize sports in ways that reflect the way women view the world. And I'm not saying women automatically view the world in a way that's different than men, but because of the way gender has been defined in our cultures, women and men do look, on average, look at the world in different ways. So basically, when we use a critical approach, it makes us aware that the production and the distribution and the application of knowledge is not a completely objective process. So, in other words, when we use a critical approach, we assume that the values and the orientations of the people who do the research and ask the research questions influence the kinds of knowledge that we have. I mean, that's just, in a way, as Dora just said, is something that's right under our nose, and we don't recognize that. We're taught that science is objective, and that science doesn't depend on culture or the perspectives of the researcher or the funders, but that's not true. You know, the people who fund research want certain questions asked. That's not objective, that's subjective. And when they want certain questions asked, the research has to be done in a certain way. That's not objective, that's subjective. So we have to, as researchers, we have to be self-reflective and think critically about how we think and about the knowledge that's been created in our disciplines. I don't care if it's biology or sociology. Even biology has a subjective element to it, although the biologists would say no. They would say we are real scientists and we are really objective. It's all of you social scientists that are soft and subjective. In fact, we call you the soft sciences, and we in chemistry and biology, we're the hard sciences because we're objective. Well, I take issue with that and say that the questions that biologists have asked over the years, even, I'll give you an example, even the conception of the body, how the relationships between internal organs and how the body works. If you look over time, those kinds of orientations or perspectives have changed. And there's different ways to look at the body. The body is looked at differently in Asian cultures than it is in so-called Western cultures. So that means that biology has a subject, even related to the body, has a subjective element to it, a cultural element. So we have to be critical about all the research that we look at and understand that when we talk about sports, knowledge about sports is created in certain ways and it can be applied in many different ways. And this is, and for many different purposes. So, for example, there is research that shows that if a coach wants to control players very completely and have players be willing to sacrifice their bodies for the game, for winning, for the team, that the best way to do that is to keep all of those players at the level of maturity of about a 14-year-old, okay? A first-year high school student. And if you can do that, they will depend on you for feedback, just like adolescents depend upon parents, for example, for feedback about, and for permission to do this and to do that. And so we know that that's an effective way to control young men or young women. But that may not be the most humane way. It may not be the best way in terms of trying to help those individuals develop as human beings, but it's the best way to get them to win. And so for example, some coaches could use that information to control and to undermine the development of their athletes. And some coaches do that. Other coaches would say, wait a minute, there's other research that says that there's other forms of leadership that can also be effective, and I'm going to choose to use another form. So basically, we can apply knowledge in different ways, depending on what our purposes are, what our own values are. And that's very frustrating to a researcher, because when I do research and I publish an article in a journal, and I see a policymaker take that article and use it for a purpose that's contrary to what I intended that article to be used for, that's a problem for me. And that's why when we do research, we have to be very careful when we write up our conclusions to make sure that we let people know that that this research should probably be applied in a particular way, and try to discourage people from applying it in a way that's exploitive, that leads to consequences that don't contribute to the overall well-being of the people that they're working with. So application of knowledge involves choices, and those choices are crucial factors in shaping the social worlds in which we live. So when you're a senator or a minister of sport, you can look at all of the research and you can choose what research do I want to use to inform my decisions, and how do I want to apply that research. And so that's a subjective process, but it's a very important process because it influences the sport in the whole country. So when researchers work with the Minister of Sport, that's a tricky relationship. It's a difficult relationship because you don't want the Minister of Sport to be using your research to do things that you never intended or that actually are contrary to the very reason that you did that research in the first place. So those are difficult kinds of issues. Now, I'm sure you have some questions about the theory. If you want to ask them in Portuguese or English, that would be fine. If you would like to write them down and save them for tomorrow, give them to Donnelly, Dora, or Barbara, then they can give them to me, and we can talk about that. So we'll talk a little bit about who plays and what happens. The big issue in that chapter, in chapter 3, did we move too fast past theory?
Well, I'll try to, maybe this is a doubt or an issue that many people feel, especially those that are starting their master's degree, and they are, because most of us, we have our undergrad in physical education, so not necessarily we have contact with many theories, social theories in general. And this is something that we, in the beginning of our careers as researchers, we have trouble by finding or at least knowing enough theories to know which one we can use.
Right.
So usually we choose a few authors, then we can really read and go deeper. And then it's easier for us to have this approach. And then sometimes we only see the questions, the research questions, because we have the influence of these authors. And I will use it as an example, Pierre Bourdieu, as you cited, and Norbert Elias. And sometimes we tend to see the questions or see the possibilities of research because we have the influence of these. Right. So I'll tell an example of one particular group that I was close to, and like people were interested in Paralympic sports or sports for disabled people with disabilities, and because of the influence of some authors, we usually see a few questions from it, and from the table I would say some structural theories have more influence. So we usually, many people here study more the structures in sports more than the interactions or even from cultural theories. And sometimes we leave a paradox inside of us because we don't know how to go further things. mainly because, of course, people have 2 years to finish a master's degree or 4 years to do a PhD. So I would like to, I think it would be interesting for many of us if you could talk a little bit on this,
Okay.
and just in a way that it's not right or wrong,
Mhm.
but how can we develop other ways of approaching for social theories or research questions or theories and research in general.
Right. Yeah, I think that there are the particular research questions lead to the use of particular theories. So if I'm looking at sport participation, for example, I might choose structural theories because structural theories would help me pay attention to the built-in barriers that exist within social organization. The things that either provide people with more opportunities or fewer opportunities to participate. And so you would use some structural theories, for example. And if you thought social class was very important, you might want to use some kind of a Marxist or neo-Marxist theory. If you're looking at other kinds of issues, you might want to use Foucault. If you're looking at how bodies are changed, how people's orientations about their own body and how they control their body are changed when they participate in sport. And Foucault's theory would be perfect for that. So, there's particular questions that connect you with particular theories. And when you're doing a thesis or a dissertation, you generally use one theory, and to show your committee that you can dig deep into a theory and understand all of its application, all of its implications, and that you can apply it to help you understand your research question. And then you write your thesis, you defend it, but 5 years later, if you stay in the academic world and continue to do research, you might also say, well, I used Bourdieu in my thesis, but now I'm going to look at the same data and I'm going to use George Herbert Mead, who is a social interactionist, and see what that lens, what that viewpoint whether it can lead to new ways to understand my data. Or you might use a cultural theory and look at the same data and maybe come up with new ways of thinking. So you had a question?
Yeah, about what Barbara told us, like we had a talk about this a few weeks ago, I think, with Dora also. We have a group that are studying the Paralympic sports right now, and I'm thinking about to study financial of the Paralympic sports. And Barbara told that was supposed to be, it could be interesting to study the Eichberg-Natural with that. And I just told her that actually I was afraid about that because I don't have too much knowledge about Pierre Bourdieu, and I don't have 2 years to make my dissertation. And I told her, it's like I don't have so much time to learn about Pierre Bourdieu and use it in my studies.
Yeah.
So it could be difficult to apply material like in less than 2 years.
And what theory are you using?
No, like we are talking about you with Dora and Barbara, but I didn't decide yet about material to study about that yet.
Yeah, one of the important things about theory is that it provides you with a set of tools, a set of concepts, first of all, that you can use to help understand a particular reality. And it also helps you understand the relationships between various parts of that reality. So if you don't use theory, you're just using your own personal guesses, hunches, and in a way, you're using your own personal theory. But your personal theory is related almost exclusively to your experiences. And when you want to explain something that goes beyond your experiences, it's helpful to have a framework so that you can think about this reality in ways that are not limited by your personal experience. And that's the usefulness of theory. And that's why Barbara said you should think about what you know. You don't have to read 4 books by Bourdieu. There for a master's thesis, I would think that you can focus in on some of the summaries of Bourdieu. Maybe look at some of his original work, but you don't have to know everything about Bourdieu in order to use parts of his theory. But it's important to use even parts of Bourdieu because Bourdieu has tried to take information from research that's been done all over the world and to use that research to make sense of reality. And so if you want to make sense of the Paralympics, it would be nice to have someone sitting beside you who is saying, why don't you think about we'll talk about this on Wednesday. Why don't you think about what's happening when a person with a disability is in a group like this? What are the factors that affect the relationships? What kind of habitus, for example, does someone with a disability develop over time? And what are the factors that contribute to that habitus? Now, habitus is not something that we just know about. Habitus is something that is a concept that Bourdieu developed to help us understand all of the factors that influence people's lives in particular situations. So habitus is a nice concept to use to try to understand what goes on in the lives of people with disabilities and in their relationships. So the concept of feel would be important because that kind of limits the context within which you're viewing reality. So it's helpful to have those concepts. I know when I first started doing research, I had the same issues as you did. I thought, I'm just going to go talk to people, I'm going to write my research. Well, then I started reading some people who didn't make sense to me. They were providing me with new words that helped me see the world in a different way. And I'll just give you some simple examples. I liked interactionist theories at first, and structural theories, but the interactionist theories helped me understand that the concept of self is very important in understanding how people interact with each other. The concept of taking the role of the other, putting yourself in the position of another person. And then putting yourself in the position of a number of other people all at once is called the generalized other by George Herbert Mead. So just those 3 concepts helped me understand what was going on in youth sports. And I gave you that example yesterday where I said that 8, 9, 10-year-olds cannot fully understand complex competitive team sports because they have not learned to put themselves in the roles of many people simultaneously at the same time. They have not developed a generalized other. And let me give you, well, if you think about this concept of generalized effort, which usually develops around 12 or 13 years old in most children, you know, it varies from one child to another. But you think about religions. When do you get confirmed in the Catholic religion? Usually about age 14, right? Or not? What do you do confirmation in Brazil?
Yeah,
12? Yeah. And when in the Jewish religion, when do you have bar mitzvahs, bas mitzvahs? About the same time, 12, 13, 14. You know, religions understood that you can't really become an adult member of a religious community until you can think about right and wrong, morality, in generalized terms. Not just in terms of what your mother says, what your minister says, what your teacher says, but take all of that, all of those orientations, and put them all together and come up with your own definition of right and wrong. And what's that called? A conscience. All right? So religions have, if you look at how religious rituals, when they occur, especially those the confirmation, bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, and I don't know about in Islam what ritual might occur, but and in other religions, but they generally occur 12 to 14, because that's, people have learned over time that that's kind of when you're able to become a participating adult in a religious community. When you have the ability to think in terms of a generalized other. So those concepts really help me understand why parents were on the sideline yelling at their children, stay in position, where do you belong? I told you to, you know, stay there. And why the coach has to tie the goalkeeper to the goals, because the goalkeeper, you know, 7 years old, might run all over. So I tried to understand that, and George Herbert Mead's theory, just with these little few concepts, helped me to understand what was happening in teen youth sports. Now, I used other theories too, but that's just one example. And if I were a master's degree student, I could use George Herbert Mead and just 3 or 4 concepts in his theory, and I'd probably get my master's degree by looking at by doing a study of youth sports. And so I wouldn't have to know all the theories, but you know, the important thing is when you get your master's degree or your PhD is you learn the value of theory. And you learn that when you're studying certain topics, it's really good to use structural theories because they call your attention to the various parts of the way the social world is organized that have a big impact on people's lives. So social class, gender, race and ethnicity, ability, disability, all of those things are related to the structure of our society. Our society has been organized around the definitions that have been given to masculinity, femininity, and so on. So you could use interactionist theories in some ways to look at things related to gender. You could use structural theories, and you could use cultural theories. So, you know, it's your choice. And Barbara is just trying to help you because maybe she thinks Bourdieu is really suited for this particular issue. But
it does, like.
yeah.
Makes sense.
But if you were to read research in the disability literature, you would find that people are using other theories too, and that they can be very helpful. So even though Barbara likes Bourdieu, you could find another theory that would be that you would feel more comfortable with that would help you understand the issues that you're concerned about. So, I remember when I was in your situation, I would go to the journals and I would see how other people used theories when they were dealing with questions similar to the question that I wanted to ask. And so I learned enough about certain theory to get my master's degree and to get my PhD. But I was certainly not an expert in theory at that time. I've learned much more in the last half century. Okay. So choosing a theory is important because it helps you ask questions, it helps you see things that you didn't see before, and see relationships between things that you didn't see before. And that's the important thing. Now there are some people, when I taught in England, and I've worked with Eric Dunning, for example, and Eric Dunning was a disciple, in a true sense, of Norbert Elias. And he feels that it's his destiny in life to bring Norbert Elias to the world. And so he is almost like a minister, an Eliasian minister. And he's trying to bring Norbert Elias's theory to the rest of the world because he thinks it's very helpful in understanding what's going on in modern society today. So the students that have gone to the University of Leicester, where Eric Dunning teaches, they all use Norbert Elias and figurational theory. Everyone for their. So Joe McGuire, a good friend of mine, he used figurational theory. But Joe McGuire has changed figurational theory because he's studied other theories, and that's helped him expand figurational theory in ways that helps him understand more about sport in the world. And Elizabeth Height, who I've worked with, was a student of Joe McGuire. And so she has expanded a little bit more than McGuire has, and has combined figurational theory with other theories as she studied aging in sport and disability issues in sport. So when you read chapter 10, that chapter was written by Elizabeth and me together, and she was using 3 or 4 different theoretical frameworks to think about aging and involvement in physical activity and disability. So now, for me, when I go outside, I look around as a sociologist, I have many, many different concepts and theories to use. And so sometimes I bore people because, I can talk sociologically about what happens in the World Cup or, in a youth game and people say, oh, give it a rest, because I have all of these different concepts, Have you ever thought about why all those logos are around the field and why the logos are on the jerseys and why the announcer is saying what he's saying right now? And I have all these concepts to help me pay attention to those things. Whereas everybody else says, I'm just enjoying the game. And that's fine, okay? But I like to understand more about reality than just who's winning and who's losing. So I'm interested, like I said in the first chapter, in the deeper game related to sport. And theory helps me look at that deeper game and understand. So now we can look at a couple of theories related to socialization. Because in the past, when I started reading the literature way back, 1950s, 1960s, before your parents were born. The people who studied socialization used what was called a personal internalization model. In other words, and this came right out of structural functional theory, all right, which is a structural theory. And what those theorists said was that when a child is born, that child is born into a family and eventually becomes a part of a peer group and eventually becomes part of education, becomes a part of religion, all of the formal institutions in society. And the significant people, the significant others in each of those institutional spheres, like parents and siblings, like teachers in education, like ministers in religion, like coaches in sport, they all transmit values and orientations, ideas about right and wrong, to this blank slate of a person. And so over time, this person internalizes this external culture, all right? And all parts of it. So people would study how significant others influenced the decisions that a child would make. But they saw socialization as a one-way process. It was from the external social environment to the person, and that external social environment shaped the person. All right? One-way process. So, therefore, social learning, which is the result of socialization, social learning occurs as people internalize the rules of society as they're influenced by family, friends, teachers, coaches, media, so on. So all the studies that were done in the 50s and 60s, for the most part, used that theoretical approach. But then people started to think, wait a minute, people are not just passive receivers in the socialization process, they're actually an active part of the socialization process. So instead of using social learning theory that said that we internalize the external environment, they said, let's use interactions theory, let's use an interaction model of socialization. So we look at the relationships between the person who is experiencing socialization and the rest of the world. Because that person is making choices along the way. That person is rejecting some rules and accepting others. That person is actually influencing his or her mother and the way the mother is relating to them. So any of you who are parents, or any of you who are children, so you know that you influence how your parents acted. And so, in fact, that's the whole experience of being a child is trying to play as active a role as possible in determining what the norms are going to be within your family. Now, parents have power, all right, so you've got to listen to them. They've got all the resources. But over time, you're an active agent in this process. You're active in your relationship with your parents, and you try to get them to change the rules or make qualifications to those rules. And so you play an active part in your socialization process. And so the social interaction model differs from the personal internalization model. So people started using interactionist theories to study socialization. And so if you look at the definition that I use in that chapter, you see that socialization is an active process of learning and social development. It's not a passive process, and it occurs as we interact with others and experience mutual influence. So, and as we become familiar with the social worlds in which we live. And this is the difficult part to understand, as we synthesize, all right, as we kind of take all of our experience and try to make sense of it, and then apply what we've learned, and determine what's useful, what isn't so useful, and then use those determinations to make decisions and to take action. Right, so this is a complicated process. This isn't just a process of learning what the rules are and following them or not. It's a process where we actually are the key factor in the socialization process. So, that leads us to look at socialization in a very different way. And that is the model that's used today. So, and that model is important because it helps connect our individual experiences with the structures around us and with the culture around us. And but we all emphasize different parts of the culture in our lives. You know, I can talk to another person from the United States and we're very different, even though we've grown up in the same culture. I can talk to my sisters and my brother when he was alive. I can talk to them, and it's really interesting. They saw our parents, our parents, in very different ways, depending on where they were in the birth order, whether they were male or female, whether they had opportunities to interact with people outside, different people outside the home. And so, my sisters and I have different perspectives, even though we grew up in the same family, because we're active in our own socialization. So that's an important way. It's an important advancement in the theories that we use to study socialization. Now, I know that's kind of complicated, especially when you're hearing it in English, but I use that notion of socialization as an active process of learning through that whole chapter. And for example, our lifelong sport participation patterns, they are influenced by the context in which young people are introduced to sports. And so one of the things that I was interested in, I ran in this race too, but before the race started, I was out in front of the starting line, and I took this picture because this was a family with 4 children. And, the mom, the dad, the daughter, the son, and 2 a boy and a girl in the stroller. And I thought, now I wonder if those children are going to be more active in their adult life than kids who don't run with their parents. Now that's a good research question. And you would probably want to use, I would probably use interactionist theory and the social interaction model to ask questions about this, to gather data from my sample and to make interpretations of the data. So, so what are the conditions that are most likely to lead to a child to be active throughout his or her life? And do experiences like this matter? And I kind of think they matter, but I'm not sure, you know, because my daughter is very, very active, but her husband is very, very sedentary, and one of her 3 daughters plays sport and is very active, and 2 of them don't. So, you know, you've got different dynamics going on in the family. Who identifies more with the mom? Who identifies more with the father? Who's, you know, what kinds of messages have they been picking up? And why did one of them pick up different messages than the other? You know, all of those things are things that you would pay attention to if you were using a social interaction model. So, so the big questions that people are really concerned about related to sport and socialization is how do people become to stay involved in sport? And the old literature, the old personal internalization literature said that it depends on these 3 factors: person's abilities, characteristics, and resources, the influence of significant others, and the availability of opportunities. Well, that makes sense, right? It's not that they were wrong on everything. They identified those factors as being important. But the more recent research that uses the social interaction model uses qualitative methods. They don't use quantitative methods like the old personal internalization theorists did, the social learning theorists. So they use in-depth interviews, field work, participant observation, strategic conversation, and they focus on the relationships and the decision-making processes that occur over time. And they recognize that reasons for participation change over time. So, and this is a really important thing because we're finding as we do research that people are not just sport participants or non-participants. You know, they participate a little bit now, and then they stop for a while, and then they may start for a while, and then they stop, and then they start. So, you know, it's not just that we internalize ideas about sport participation. We have to look at where a person exists in the social world and how they make decisions to understand when people start sport, when they quit, when they stay, and why they stay, and so on. So we know now that sport participation is a dynamic thing. But if you look at some of the old literature, they all divided. When they did their surveys, they had participants and non-participants. And they tried to say, well, these are the characteristics of the participants, and these are the characteristics of the non-participants. And that's okay. But you know, you're never a participant forever, and you may not be a non-participant forever. So, so it's hard to divide the world into participants and non-participants because people are playing an active role in making decisions about whether they're going to participate. So when I did research with Anita White in England on this, we looked at how young people were making decisions about their participation in sport. And what are the factors that led them to make those decisions? And the reason we did that study was that in England, the British Sports Council at that time, it's now Sport England, had a big campaign in the mid-1980s, when a lot of young people were getting into trouble, a lot of deviants in England at that particular time, soccer hooligans, all sorts of things. And so the government thought, we're going to use sport to get people off the streets, all right? So they had this big campaign. They paid millions back then. They hired a comedian that was very popular with young people. And the name of the campaign was Ever Thought of Sport? ? And they had this comedian on television commercials talking about all of the new sport opportunities that were available. And they spent millions on setting up those opportunities. And what they found, they didn't find, they noticed that this was a total disaster. It was not effective at all. So Anita and I went to the Sports Council and said, you know, maybe we ought to talk to some of the young people. Because maybe they're just not internalizing messages from the media. Maybe they're actively making choices. And they said, oh, well, but are you going to do a sample from the whole country and look at participants and non-participants? And we said, no, we're going to look at young people and how they make decisions in their leisure lives. And they said, well, we don't think that's a very good idea, but we'll give you a few thousand pounds to do it. So we did a study on the east end of London, low-income dock area along the Thames River, where there was high unemployment and where there was a lot of young people getting in trouble. And we interviewed 60 young people, and we used an interactionist model in order to ask questions and interpret our data. And what we found was that you couldn't divide young people into participants and non-participants. There were a lot of young people who were participating in all sorts of things that involve physical movement, but they weren't participating in the government programs. You know, they were going to a dance class, or they were walking a dog for a neighbor, so it wasn't like they were ignoring the fact that their bodies could move. It was that they were just ignoring the government programs. And a lot of the young people who the government said were non-participants, and when you use the term non-participant, there's kind of a moral connotation that goes along with that. You know, they're lazy, they've got no motivation, they are not interested in life and all of these things. They're non-participants. But we found that the people the government was calling non-participants were engaged in a variety of different things and were actually had nothing in common with these moral connotations that the government was imposing on them. And so we wrote this up, and we put it in the Sports Council library, made a bunch of copies. It was a little ethnography. And the people who run leisure centers, you know, the recreation centers, found out about this, and they started checking out the report. And 5 years later, when Anita was promoted to a big job in the Sports Council, she found out that our research was being used to help these people, these recreation people, understand young people and how to create programs to get them involved. They used our report and they ignored the report that they paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I'm saying that what basically we told the recreation center people is if you want to create programs that young people like, you listen to young people. All right? Because they make decisions. So you talk to young people. You don't create a program without talking to the people who you want to serve with a program. And if you do that, then you understand how you can maybe create something that fits into the decision-making structures and processes that those young people use. And a lot of the recreation center people felt that that campaign that the government told them they had to implement in their recreation centers, they started forgetting that, and they started talking to young people. They actually started developing young people's councils in the recreation center so that the young people would be advisors to them and help create the very programs in the recreation center. And those were some of the recommendations that we made in our report. So that was the difference between using the old personal internalization model versus using a social interaction model. And one of the things that we told recreation people was, in our recommendations, was a lot of kids will quit, not because they don't like the program, not because they don't like you, but because their mother's sick, or because they have to take care of a younger brother or sister. So then, if you talk to young people, you create a child care center area within your recreation center so that people can bring their younger sibling, and then 2 or 3 of the participants will watch the younger siblings for a while, and then 2 or 3 others will trade up. And in that neighborhood that we were studying, that was very helpful, because those people there, the young people, they were short of resources, and there were all sorts of factors impinging on their lives, structural factors. So we tried to figure out how we could neutralize some of those structural factors so that they could make choices that would involve participation. The theories helped us understand why young people participate or not participate or avoid participation. And I'm not going to go through this because we've already gone for an hour. But these are the studies. The studies, I try to summarize studies on getting involved in sport and staying involved in sport. 3 studies that kind of help you understand the process, all right? And then 2 or 3 studies that help you understand the process of quitting or changing your involvement. And so the getting involved were the 3 studies by Anita and me and Peter Donnelly and Kevin Young and Sharon Wheeler. And Wheeler's is the most recent. And it's a really interesting study. I wonder, when you look at the little summary that I have, I wonder if it's applicable to Brazil. Because it was done in England. And she found that the family context is really crucial in terms of making possible sport participation among young people. And it's really applicable in England now, because England is becoming more and more a neoliberal society, where there are fewer and fewer government-supported programs, there's more privatized programs that cost money. And so now, instead of being able to go to a local program funded by the government in a local park, like I did when I was 10 years old, now, if you're a 10-year-old and you want to be involved in sport, you have to have parents who can afford to pay, who value sport participation enough to pay, who have the resources to get you to and from the practices and the matches. And so things have really changed in the United States and England and other neoliberal societies, where the family is much more important as the source of all opportunities. And so Wheeler's study is looking at that kind of a context. And I wonder if it applies to Brazil. I don't think it does in the same way, because you still have government-funded and locally funded programs that, you know, for young people when they go half day to school, the other half day there's programs that they can become involved in that are free, unless you go to a private school, then they may cost money. But so Wheeler's findings may not apply to Brazil as much as they apply in the United States and in Canada and in okay. Let me get off on something related to Chapter 3. A really good source for understanding Chapter 3 is this report. It is thick. Nike did this, and you will never, the only time you see Nike is right here on the back. They didn't want this to be branded, no big swoosh on the cover, but it's called Design to Move. And the first page asks an interesting question, or makes an interesting statement. The world has stopped moving. In every country around the world, almost every country, people are becoming increasingly sedentary. And that's because of changes in work, changes in transportation, changes in communications technologies, changes in all sorts of things. So the kinds of movement that people engaged in the past are no longer happening. And because of that, people are gaining more and more weight, and in some cases, and I don't want to equate weight with all sorts of negative things automatically, but in addition to gaining weight, people have more weight-related and lifestyle-related diseases that are costing countries massive amounts of money in terms of their healthcare systems. And for example, in the United States, 35% of the children between 6 and 12 are classified by a BMI index as obese. 35%. Those are future diabetics. Those are future heart problems. Those are future all sorts of problems. And we already spend 3 times more than any other country on our health system. So people are really worried because children in the United States, even though sport is more popular than it has ever been in American history, children are more sedentary than ever. So, and they're more obese than ever. And after a break, I'm going to show you some slides of the United States. It has each state, and it's a color-coded slide that the Center for Disease Control has created with data over the years. And I can go back, I think, to 1980 or 70, and go all the way to 2008, and show you the rising obesity just by flipping through the slides real quickly. And anybody who I've shown that to said, "Oh man, we have a problem," you know. And so Nike said, "Well, wait a minute. Our bodies are designed to move. So how do we get them moving?" And this is the report, and I put it online, so it's pretty big, so you can take a look at it. And if any of you would like to borrow this hard copy between now and next Wednesday and pass it around, that would be. It's on the internet, in the Dropbox. Oh, and you can get it online. Yeah, so if you just Google, do a search for Design to Move, you'll find it. It's a physical activity action agenda. And The people who did this, I worked with them, and we did a 2.5-year project called Project Play, Sport for All, Play for Life, a playbook to get every kid in the game. So we are trying to reinvent youth sports in the United States. Because right now, young people are not being attracted to youth sports. Football participation, which I don't mind, is down. That's American football. Soccer participation is down. Baseball participation is down. Basketball participation is down. Softball participation is down. Swimming participation is down. There's a few sports that are up, lacrosse and what else? A couple of others, but they're small sports. But we have had declines in every sport. The major sport federations in the United States are very worried because their developmental programs are failing to attract young people. And so we said, if we want to attract young people, we're going to have to reinvent youth sports. And so we did 2.5 years of gathering data, reviewing all the literature, talking to influential people, 14 big roundtable seminars that we had with experts in health, in urban planning, in education, in various sport organizations, at the USOC, all of those things, getting information, and all of the information got summarized in terms of 8 recommendations in this report. And this report is online too. And I'm trying to think. I put a copy in the Dropbox, but you can also get it online in a form that will fit any of your digital devices, all right? And you can just do a search for Project Play Report, and it will come up under the Aspen Institute, which is a big think tank that helped support this project. Okay, so, and any of you who are working with young people in sports, it's a very, I think it would be a useful document, even though it was done for the United States. Okay, so why don't we take a 15-minute break now, and then when we come back, you can let me know if you want to talk more about socialization or if you want to talk more about deviance, because we don't have time to cover everything. So, and one of my favorite topics, by the way, is the use of performance-enhancing substances in sport, and you know how that's dealt with in terms of deviance. So we can talk about that if you want, but we can talk about other things. Okay, so let's take 15 minutes now.
Não, faz ele chegar lá e focar em